targeted against Scud missiles and chemical weapons storage facilities in northwest Iraq. Going in very late at night, we became aware that surface-to-air missiles had targeted our aircraft.
When that fateful moment came, in a blinding flash of light, Colonel David Eberly and his flying partner, Major Tom Griffin, knew their F-15 fighter jet was going down.
Instantly, I knew we had been hit. And yet, through training, I was already reacting. My arms had fallen to the sides of the seats. I was rotating the ejection levers and squeezing the triggers. At some point later, I awoke or became conscious, kneeling upright in the desert.
In the barren landscape of the Iraqi desert, Eberly still had peace.
After evading for 3 nights, we were captured on the Syrian border as we attempted to walk out of Iraq.
Back at home, Eberly's wife Barbara had been conducting life as usual. But just days before her husband had been shot down, she had a sense that something was about to go wrong.
I called a friend of mine. I had been a friend for several years. And I said, Ann, I need you here. And she said, well, why? And I said, I have a bad feeling that something's going to happen.
When the acting wing commander showed up at her home after news of Eberly's downing, Barbara felt her premonition had come true.
I could just see by the way he was looking at me that something was wrong. And I couldn't turn my back. I just started backing up. I backed up into the dining room, and he said to me, Barbara, we have to talk. My thoughts were that he was dead, that he had died that night.
But her husband was not dead. Instead, Eberly and Griffin were captured by Iraqi soldiers, which began David's unbelievable ordeal as a prisoner of war.
We spent the next 43 days in 4 different types of prisons, from a civilian prison called Abu Ghraib to the Iraqi military intelligence headquarters in a maximum security area.
Food became an issue. Eberly and other prisoners were literally being starved to death.
We were fed about once a day unless we were moved. And during that time, it was maybe a cup of tomato broth and possibly a half of a piece of pita bread. Oftentimes, we soon learned whether or not to ask for any water. One of the guards in particular would simply open the little door in the cell and spit in her face and say something about George Bush. Not always was there enough food to go around, which was the disheartening thing. One of the Brits, in fact, I feel would have probably starved to death had we not been bombed and they'd be forced to move us.
Hours of endless interrogation tested David's sanity.
At one point, after yelling and going into several tirades, they had reached their point at which a guy came up, put a 9mm to my temple, and said, now we want to know how we can camouflage the bridge. And I had reached my line in the sand. And I could imagine off to the side wall, when they pulled the trigger, that all the blood splattering over the wall. And he pulled the trigger, and nothing happened.
Through the nightmarish ordeal, Eberly was sustained by a sense of peace. On March 5, 1991, after 43 days of imprisonment and torture, Eberly was set free. When Barbara first saw him, she knew the ordeal had taken a significant toll.
We had been to Dachau when we were stationed in Germany, and in all truthfulness, he looked like one of the prisoners in Dachau. He had almost been starved to death. They put an IV in him right away, and after they collected blood and said there were no trace minerals or vitamins, and that it would have been a matter of days before he starved to death.
Although the captivity had taken a physical toll, coming home was healing for both David and Barbara.
The happiest moment was greeting him immediately upon his return to Andrews Air Force Base. As little as he was, and as weak as he was, and mind you, I outweighed him at the time, he was still able to pick me up and swirl me around just like you'd see in the movies.
The Eberlys both grew through their experience. They never gave up hope or succumbed to the fear of what might happen. David Eberly coped with his captivity through writing poems, singing, and reciting words of freedom he recalled from his youth. He feels he was miraculously protected and sustained. He knows he will never forget how in the midst of his most horrid experience, he had hope.
No matter which cell, how dirty, how bad it was, I never felt alone.